Good evening and welcome to a slightly later Scotland at 7. My name is Ben Francis and tonight we'll start the show as usual with an update on the ongoing situation in the Middle East. At least 53,977 Palestinians have been killed and 122,966 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Authority. An Israeli strike killed dozens earlier on Monday at Mahal al-Jawari school, where people were seeking refuge, according to local health officials. Gaza's civil defense said the death toll has risen to 36, with the majority of those killed being women and children. Israel's military claimed it targeted militants operating from the school. Police were deployed near the walls of Jerusalem's Old City ahead of an annual Jerusalem Day march. The event happens to mark Israel's capture of East Jerusalem. A US-backed NGO has said it is to distribute aid in Gaza, despite its head walking out after saying that the operation could not fulfill its mission in a way that adhered to humanitarian principles. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's GHF said in a statement that it is to launch direct aid delivery with the aim of reaching 1 million Palestinians by the end of the week. The Hamas-led government media office in Gaza has described an earlier Israeli attack on school being used as a shelter as a brutal massacre. It claimed that 18 children were among the dead and described the attack as a direct extension of the crime of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Chancellor Merz of Germany says he will warn Benjamin Netanyahu not to take Gaza attacks too far. He said he is to speak to Netanyahu later this week and will tell him that Israel should not take its attacks on Gaza too far. In America, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Noem had been in Israel in the wake of the killing of 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington last week. She visited the Black Arrow Memorial Site and an overlook on the Israel-Gaza border. Hamas executed 4 men looting aid trucks, sources said. The 4 criminals who were executed were involved in the crimes of looting and causing the death of members of a force tasked with securing aid trucks, one source told Reuters. The Irish government is set to unveil a bill that bans imports from occupied Palestinian territories, marking the first move by a EU member to curtail trade in goods produced in Israeli settlements, illegal under UN international law. Hamas has agreed to a proposal made by the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff for a Gaza ceasefire, a Palestinian official has said. The new proposal, which is conditional to the release of 10 hostages and 70 days of truce, was received by Hamas through mediators. On to our Ukraine update on day 1188 of the war. Donald Trump has said in his latest comment that Russian President Vladimir Putin has, quote, gone absolutely crazy, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, quote, is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. He said that something has happened to Putin that if he took all of Ukraine, it would lead to the downfall of Russia. He is needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. I've always said that he wants all, capitalized, of Ukraine, not just a piece of it, and maybe that's proving to be right. If he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. Speaking to reporters at an airport in New Jersey shortly before the post went online, Trump said, "I'm not happy with Putin." Asked if he was considering more sanctions than Russia, Trump replied, "Absolutely." Comments came after Zelensky criticized the United States for not saying anything after Russia carried out its largest air raid in 3 years of the war. The silence of America, the silence of others in the world, only encouraged Putin, Ukraine's president wrote on Telegram. Every such terrorist Russian strike is reason enough for new sanctions against Russia. Keith Kellogg, the US Special Envoy for Ukraine, condemned the attacks, but without any mention of Russia or Putin. Interior Minister Ihor Klemko said 12 people had been killed and 60 more wounded in the wave of drone and ballistic missile strikes on Saturday night into Sunday, the second consecutive night of heavy attacks across the country. Earlier death tolls given separately by regional authorities and rescuers had put the number of dead at 13. Ukrainian officials confirmed Moscow had launched 298 drones and 69 missiles in multiple waves. The latest attacks should be met with additional Western sanctions, Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadfall told the public broadcaster ARD on Sunday. Quote, Putin is not interested in peace, he wants to continue this war, and we must not allow this, which is why the European Union will agree to additional sanctions, he said in a live interview with ARD's Break Berlin. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, also called for, quote, the strongest international pressure on Russia to stop this war. She said on X, last night's attacks again show Russia is bent on more suffering and annihilation of Ukraine. Devastating to see children among the innocent victims harmed and killed. We need the strongest international pressure on Russia to stop this war. The attacks came as the two countries completed their biggest prisoner swap since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, with 1,000 captured soldiers and civilian prisoners exchanged by each side. Images of the release, which the two sides agreed on in Istanbul just a week ago, showed returned prisoners with shaved heads, many wrapped in flags, being reunited with loved ones in Ukraine. The exchange was the latest of dozens of swaps since the war began, and the biggest involving Ukrainian civilians. The Netherlands will send the last one of 24 promised F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine today, Defense Minister Rupan Berkelmans told a Dutch television talk show yesterday. The first 23 Dutch F-16 jets were delivered from last summer. The Netherlands has also provided fighter jets to a training center in Romania for Ukrainian pilots and crew. Now on to our first story of the night. John Swinney said that the SNP government is, quote, putting money back in people's pockets. First Minister John Swinney has confirmed that the Scottish Government will permanently scrap peak rail fares from September, a move he says will save commuters hundreds of pounds each year. The policy, part of the Scottish Government's cost of living guarantee, is set to benefit rail passengers across Scotland, including those travelling from Hamilton, Larkhall, Stonehouse to Glasgow Central, where the by-election happens to be taking place. The announcement followed a pilot scheme and is aimed at reducing everyday costs for working families. Commuters making the journey 5 days a week from Hamilton Central to Glasgow currently pay £9.20 for an anytime day return, compared to £6 off-peak. By removing peak pricing, annual savings from September will exceed £760. Those travelling from Larkhall, where a peak return costs £11.20, will save around £910 a year. The Scottish Government has linked the fare reform to a broader package of support measures designed to ease financial pressures. These include free university tuition, free prescriptions, and the UK's most generous childcare offer. Officials say the permanent removal of peak fares reflects the government's commitment to supporting people during the ongoing cost of living crisis. Swinney has framed the long-awaited decision as part of a long-term strategy to make public transport more accessible and affordable, while also encouraging more sustainable travel choices. The move highlights a contrast between devolved and reserved policy decisions. The Scottish Government has criticised the UK Labour Government for recent changes to welfare support, including the removal of the winter fuel payments from over 36,000 pensioners in South Lancashire and cuts to disability support. With the change set to come into force from September, passengers across Scotland are expected to benefit from simplified, more affordable rail fares. The Scottish Government said the decision is a key part of its efforts to support household budgets and boost public transport use. Now on to our next story, a British story. The UK government set for £10 billion of losses on sale of NatWest Fred Goodwin walks away with £600,000 a year in pension. The UK government is expected to sell its remaining stake in NatWest, the bank, this week, closing a chapter on a £45 billion bailout from the 2008 financial crash with a likely £10 billion loss. 17 years after rescuing the then struggling Royal Bank of Scotland, now rebranded as NatWest, the UK government is poised to exit its ownership. The 2008 intervention, which saw the UK government take an 84% stakeholding, was intended to prevent wide-scale financial collapse during the global credit crisis. Despite efforts to gradually reduce the public stake through selling shares and buybacks, the final return is expected to fall short, with the average sale price of government-held shares below the 502p purchased rate. Forecasts suggest the government will recover around £35 billion of the £45 billion originally injected, resulting in a near £10 billion loss, or £10 billion transfer from the government to the bank. Meanwhile, attention has returned to former RBS chief executive Fred Goodwin, who oversaw the expansion that led to the crisis in 2008, initially awarded a £16 million pension pot that paid $700,000 annually. Public pressure led to a reduction. However, inflation-linked increases over time have lifted his current annual pension to nearly £600,000, according to financial estimates. Goodwin was removed from his position as condition of the 2008 rescue and later stripped of his knighthood. Under his leadership, the bank expanded aggressively, acquiring companies and investing heavily, including a £350 million campus in Edinburgh. These decisions left the bank vulnerable when the financial crisis hit. At the time of the collapse, RBS held assets worth $2.2 trillion, more than double the size of the UK economy. Fearing a ripple effect across the financial system and a loss of public savings, the UK government stepped in to stabilise the sector, not by nationalising, but by bailing the banks out. The remaining stake in NatWest had dropped to less than 1% earlier this month. A final share will return the bank to full private ownership for the first time since the bailout. The UK government has acknowledged the intervention was a rescue rather than an investment, with losses considered inevitable given the scale of support needed. On to our next story. The SNP back calls by Save the Children for the UK government to end its two-child benefit cap. The Scottish National Party is supporting calls from Save the Children for the UK government to scrap the two-child benefit cap, and as concerns grow that 20,000 more children could be pushed into poverty if the policy isn't reversed. Save the Children has criticised the UK government's decision to delay its child poverty strategy until autumn, warning that the postponement will leave thousands of families without urgent support in the meantime. The charity is urging the UK government to begin addressing the issues through the upcoming comprehensive spending review in June and to fully remove the two-child limit in the autumn budget. Introduced in 2017 under the Conservative government, the two-child cap restricts universal credit and child tax credit payments to the first two children in most households. Campaigners have argued that the policy disproportionately affects low-income families and increases child poverty rates. The measure is reserved to Westminster, so controlled by the British government, and the Scottish government has no power to remove or amend it. While UK Labour leader Keir Starmer has said he would, quote, like, if possible, to remove the cap, no firm commitment has been made. The SNP has called on Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar to publicly push for a clear decision from the Westminster government. The Scottish Government continues to take a different approach through devolved powers, including policies such as the Scottish Child Payment, the expansion of free school meals, and investment in the social security programs aimed at reducing child poverty. The SNP argues that these efforts are being undermined by reserved policies such as the two-child cap, and has repeatedly called for the UK government to align its welfare policies with devolved measures that are designed around dignity and fairness. With the delay to the UK Labour government's child poverty strategy and no confirmed timeline for reviewing the two-child policy, there remains uncertainty about how and when the change might actually come into force. Campaigners and political parties in Scotland are pressing for clarity ahead of the next budget and spending review, warning that further inaction could lead to worsening outcomes for children who are already living in hardship. Now on to our next story. There have been calls for clarity on whether a new tax on international students will also apply in Scotland. The SNP again is urging the UK Labour government to confirm whether a proposed 6% tax on international student fees, will apply in Scotland, as uncertainty affects universities ahead of its planned implementation. UK Labour leader Keir Starmer announced the levy as part of a wider immigration policy shift, prompting concerns from Scotland's higher education sector. If applied in Scotland, in Scottish institutions, the tax is estimated to cost universities across the country $85 million annually. The policy comes despite education being a devolved responsibility, while immigration remains reserved to the UK. As of now, there has been no direct communication from Westminster to the Scottish Government about how the tax will be applied. The lack of clarity has raised questions about the extent to which the Scottish Government will have control over the measure's impact on universities north of the border. Universities Scotland, which represents the country's higher education institutions, has asked the UK government to reconsider the proposal or allow the Scottish Government to decide whether the levy should apply in Scotland. The group has warned that the charge could reduce the attractiveness of Scotland as a destination for international students, who are a significant source of funding for universities. The SNP has highlighted the importance of international students to Scotland's economy and public services, particularly in supporting the workforce and local communities. The party continues to call for a dedicated Scottish graduate visa, which would enable international graduates from Scottish universities to remain and work in the country for 2 years, with a pathway to a skilled worker visa. Concerns over the UK government's wider migration policies have also been raised by the care sector and industry groups who argue it could reduce access to workers in those fields. Universities are also contending with recent changes to national insurance contributions, which have added further financial pressures. The Scottish Government has reiterated its position that decisions affecting devolved areas such as education funding should involve consultation, at least, with Scottish ministers. In the meantime, institutions across Scotland await clarification from Westminster on whether the new international student tax will be enforced in devolved jurisdictions. Now moving on to our next story. Households worry electricity meters will not work after RTS is switched off. Hundreds of thousands of households across Great Britain are at risk of losing control over their heating and hot water from 30th of June, when the radio teleswitch service, or RTS, begins to be phased out. The RTS, a legacy technology introduced in the 1980s, currently controls off-peak electricity meters in around 392,000 homes. These meters are used mainly by households with electric heating and hot water systems, often in rural parts of Scotland and Northern England and Wales, as well as in cities like Glasgow, Edinburgh and London. The system relies on a long-wave radio signal to switch between peak and off-peak electricity rates, allowing cheaper overnight charging of heating systems. The infrastructure that powers RTS is being retired as it has reached the end of its operational life. From the 1st of July, the switch off will take place on a regional basis through to the end of September. Energy suppliers must replace these meters with modern smart meters, but concerns are growing that many installations will not be completed in the time period. Campaigners have estimated that more than 300,000 homes may still have RTS meters when the switch off starts, which, if not replaced, the systems could be stuck permanently on or off, leading to either loss of heating or unmanageable energy bills. Some customers have reported being unable to secure timely appointments from meter replacements, with delays pushing installations well past the 30th of June cut-off. Ofgem, the UK's national energy regulator, is monitoring the situation. Energy suppliers are required to provide fortnightly progress reports and submit action plans detailing how they will support affected customers. Ofgem has also noted recent improvements in supplier activity and new technical solutions to address connectivity issues in remote regions. Scottish Power has said it had passed the halfway mark in its replacement programme, with appointments booked for a third of remaining RTS customers. It confirmed that earlier technical challenges had now been resolved and smart meters were available to all affected customers. Energy UK, the industry's trade body, acknowledged the logistical difficulties, particularly in assessing remote properties. Customers still using RTS meters are being urged to contact their supplier without delay to arrange a replacement. On to our next story. Independent oversight of public sector compensation being considered by the UK government. The UK government is considering plans for a new independent body to oversee public sector compensation schemes, following criticism of government-managed redress for scandals, including Horizon Windrush and the infected blood scandal. The proposal, first suggested by Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates, is now reportedly being developed by officials in Whitehall. The new body would operate independently of government and could be used in future cases where compensation is needed for victims of public failings. It would set rules around eligibility and oversee the delivery of payments to ensure fairness and consistency. The move follows widespread criticism of previous government involvement in redress schemes. In the Windrush scandal, victims reported that the Home Office run process caused additional trauma. In the affected blood scandal, the complexity of the compensation arrangements meant many victims died before receiving any payments. And in the case of the Post Office Horizon IT failure, sub-postmasters who were wrongly accused and prosecuted said the current compensation process has been overly legalistic and lacked impartiality. Sir Alan Bates, who led the campaign for Horizon victims, has argued that redress process should be fully independent of the civil service. He said existing schemes have been shaped by government officials in ways that limited the authority of independent adjudicators. Bates recently revealed that he had been offered less than half of his original claim and expressed concern that future schemes will also fall short if no reform takes place. A 2023 report from the National Audit Office identified repeated issues in how government compensation schemes have been run, but did not directly address the structural role of the government in shaping them. Bates has since called for a standardised independent framework to ensure future redress schemes are transparent and victim-focused, with input from those actually affected. As of early 2024, 4 separate compensation schemes relating to the Horizon scandal had paid out more than £633 million to over 4,300 claimants. The UK government has stated that nearly £1 billion in total has now been paid out to more than 6,800 postmasters. Work on the proposed independent body is said to be ongoing, with officials aiming to develop a model that can give cross-government support. Now on to our next story. US threat of 50% tariffs on EU goods is postponed until at least the 9th of July. Donald Trump has postponed a planned 50% tariff on EU imports until 9th of July, following talks with the EU Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen aimed at avoiding a trade escalation. The delay follows renewed negotiations between Brussels and Washington, which have been trying to resolve rising tensions over trade terms. Trump initially threatened to impose the tariff hike from 1st of June, citing stalled discussions with the European Union and claiming EU countries had taken advantage of the United States. The latest postponement extends a previous pause granted in March to allow more time for talks. Had the tariffs gone ahead, they would have increased US duties on EU goods from the current 10% to 50%, affecting hundreds of billions of dollars in transatlantic trade. The EU is one of the US's largest trading partners, exporting goods worth over $600 billion last year, while importing around $370 billion from the US, based on American government data. Concerns have been raised across Europe over the potential impact of proposed tariffs. German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil said the measures would harm both the US and European economies, stressing the need for serious negotiation rather than further provocation. He added that Germany stood firmly behind the EU's handling of the talks. The threat of increased tariffs caused volatility in the global markets on Friday, with stocks falling and the US dollar weakening. European leaders have expressed concern that such high tariffs could cause wider economic disruption, not only between the US and EU, but also globally. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Šefčovič said the bloc remained committed to finding a mutually beneficial agreement and emphasized that future trade relations should be based on cooperation rather than pressure. Irish leader Michael Martin also warned of the risk of high tariffs, calling for a negotiated outcome and highlighting the importance of maintaining stability in the world's largest trading partnership. Further discussions are expected in the coming weeks, with both sides facing a renewed deadline of the 9th of July to reach a resolution and avoid a significant escalation in trade tensions, unless Trump delays again on the 9th of July. Moving on to our next story, the Scottish Government begins its farm payments. More than 1,000 Scottish hill farming businesses have received over £6 million in support through the Scottish Upland Sheep Support Scheme, with payments made before the end of May for the second consecutive year. The Scottish Government confirmed that more than 95% of eligible applications for the 2024 scheme have been processed on time. The support is aimed at sheep producers working on rough grazing land, typically of lower quality, who often face higher production costs and limited alternatives for farming. This funding is provided in addition to the basic payment scheme, and is designed to help stabilize cash flow and support investment in farm businesses operating in challenging environments. The payments contribute to maintaining livestock production in areas where agriculture remains vital to local economies and communities. The scheme is unique within the UK and has been maintained by the Scottish Government, in contrast to changes in support schemes seen elsewhere in other nations in the UK. Officials say that the timely payments reflect their commitment to giving farmers financial certainty and backing a sector that plays an important role in both the rural economy and food supply chain. Hill sheep farming is considered essential for preserving rural employment and preventing depopulation in remote areas. The sector also supports wider economic activity, including processing and retail, both domestically and in export markets. The Scottish Government has positioned this scheme as part of its broader rural support strategy, which includes a focus on food production, land management, and more broadly environmental outcomes. By issuing payments early in the financial year, ministers hope to give farmers the confidence to plan ahead and invest in their businesses more effectively. Agriculture Minister Jim Fairley emphasised the importance of the hill sheep sector, didn't know that was the name of the sector, to Scotland's economy and rural communities, noting that robust hill flocks underpin thousands of jobs and help ensure continued agricultural activity in less favoured areas. Now on to our next story. The University of Edinburgh create the world's first soft robots that walk off 3D printer that make them. Scientists at the University of Edinburgh have developed the world's first soft robots that can walk directly off the 3D printer that creates them using low-cost technology requiring no electronic components. The research team created the four-legged flexible robots using a new 3D printing system called the Flex Printer. Built from off-the-shelf parts costing under £400, the system is designed to be accessible and easy to use, allowing people with minimal experience to assemble and operate it in just a few days. The robots are made entirely from soft plastic and move using compressed air without the need for electronics or traditional motors. Once printed, they are connected to an air supply and walk off the printer platform. The team said the technology has the potential to broaden the use of soft robotics in a range of fields, including nuclear, decommissioning, biomedical applications, and space exploration. Soft robotics, which involves machines made from compliant materials like soft plastics, has been limited in its adoption due to high costs, complex design requirements, and the need for more expert knowledge. The University of Edinburgh's team aims to remove these barriers by offering a more standardized, low-cost approach that is widely accessible. The researchers have made their systems design open source to encourage collaboration and ongoing development within the broader scientific and engineering communities. Their work, published in the journal Device, is part of a project funded by the UK government's Engineering and Physical Science Research Council. The development was led by PhD students Mark Gempter and Johan Mack, supported by Professor Adam Stokes, head of the Institute for Bioengineering at the University of Edinburgh. They believe their platform will accelerate innovation in soft robotics by removing long-standing manufacturing challenges. With designs now publicly available, the team hopes that their system will lead to greater experimentation, research, and practical use of soft robotics across multiple sectors in the economy. The robots are palm-sized, simple to produce, and demonstrate a new approach to creating flexible, intelligent machines without the complexity of electronic systems. Well, that is all for tonight, but before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everybody who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We were £16,000 short of our funding requirement in 2024, which left us short of the money we need to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We have raised over £10,000 this year, so far, but we still urgently need to raise another £7,000 to pay our bills now. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford just £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.